In this video, we're going to take a look at the oscillator frequency modulation parameters. I'm going to go ahead and reload our default instrument patch here. I'm going to turn my filter to a 1-pole, turn my cutoff up, and I'm going to set my mixer down here to oscillator 1, turn the lock on, and just to be safe, I'm going to turn oscillators 2, 3, and 4 off, so I know the only thing you're going to hear is oscillator 1. Like that. So let's go to our frequency modulation page here. We're just going to be looking at oscillator 1 at this point. In the upper right hand corner here we've got a parameter called FM octave. This determines how many octaves the full range of modulation will have on an oscillator. Starts out at 0.5, which is half an octave. Then we have 1 octave, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 10 octaves. This is going to affect the total range of LFO, envelope, and our auxiliary mod here. So let's start out with just a single octave. Here I can increase the LFO amount from 0 to 100 or down to minus 99. By pressing the switch, I can quickly jump to a value of 0, 100, or minus 99. Let's start at 100 for now. And let's just have a listen to what this is sounding like. Okay, it's really hard to perceive anything there, so let's take a look at our LFO, and we've got a really low frequency set up on it, so let's speed that up. And go back to our frequency modulation page. So that sounds okay. Sounds like some little pitch modulation, but let's say we want to control how much of that LFO is modulating it. So we go over here to the control just to the left of it. And let's say we want the mod wheel. Now as we increase this mod wheel, we'll increase the amount of LFO affecting the pitch of oscillator 1. Now, let's say for instance, we've got this LFO modulating the pitch, but maybe we want to increase the pitch of the LFO as well. We can go down here and take the mod wheel and assign it, let's say 100%. So it's going to increase this by 1 octave. And maybe we don't want a full octave. Maybe we want just a little bit here. Or if we want to get crazy, we could really crank this up. And if we would want to clear that out, we just press that button. Mod wheel has no effect on our speed of our LFO, but we still have the amplitude modulation of the LFO. And we could adjust that LFO's rate. Or maybe select a different waveform. Let's try something different. As long as we're doing this, let's apply touch to control the LFO's amount. And you see how that works. Now let's clear this out. Go back to 0. We're going to turn that off. Now let's try playing with the envelope amount. I'm going to press it once to go up to 100. Now I could press it again to be a negative modulation value, or again to clear out the modulation value, but I'm going to start at 100. And since we chose a default patch, we need to go here to envelope and set up some times, because by default these envelopes are all set to 0. So we hear nothing. Let's increase the decay time. Now that's okay. Let's turn up a little bit of release time just so we don't get a click if we release it too quick. Let's go ahead and select maybe a sine wave. Maybe a lower frequency too. Maybe we're trying to create a kick drum. Now we could also go to our envelopes here, turn on envelope repeat, and get more of an LFO type repetition to that modulation. We can increase our modulation amount. And that's just some of what you can do. Let's go ahead and now, since our envelope is repeating, let's try something else. Let's apply a control to control the envelope's amplitude. Let's say we want to assign touch. Or we could do velocity. So if we hit this, touch a key lightly, we get a very small amount. If we touch it more abruptly, with more of the pad of our finger, we're going to get more modulation. Let's try something else. Key 2 means we're going to have 0 modulation at our low key and the max modulation up at our high key. And you get the idea. Let's say we want to assign the stick. We can do that. And we could even assign, let's say, LFO 1 to control the amplitude of envelope 1. And that's kind of interesting. Let's go back to a sine wave. Let's clear that out. Now, finally, let's take a look at these auxiliary mods here. So you've already got your LFO and your envelope that's dedicated to every oscillator, and the auxiliary allows you to add one other element to that mix. So right here we've got randomization, so every time I hit this, that's putting it up there pretty far in the frequency. And I'm going to go ahead and select more of a traditional waveform with more harmonics. Now if we wanted to, we could use this randomization just to create a very slight change in the detuning. Let's go ahead, go back to our mixer, turn up oscillator 2, turn our mixer off, so we're going to get an even blend of oscillator 1 and 2. So every time I hit that, a new random value is affecting this slightly. The other thing to keep in mind is there's random 1 and random 2. Okay, so 1, if you're playing at least one note, you get no new random value if you're gliding, but if you go to random 2, you get a random value every new note you play. For whatever effect you want to do there. Key 1 and key 2, those are pretty much just like key follows, although you can use those to stretch or do some, let's say, opposite polarity of the pitches going up as you play down the keyboard. We've got velocity, touch. Let's say we want to increase the pitch. Maybe we want to go down in pitch. And again, this controls our octave setting here, so if we want to go up 3 octaves. Set that back to 1. We've got mod wheel. Now for instance, the other day somebody came to me and said, hey, you know, these pitch wheels only go +2 semitones or -2 semitones in the pitch bend, and that's fixed. And they were wondering, hey, can I adjust that range and do, say, an octave or whatever? Well, you can here, but we're going to leave the pitch bend to left and right motion, and instead we're going to have your custom bend assigned to the mod wheel. Let's do that. So as we increase this fully, we're going to pitch it up 1 octave. And you could do that separately for every oscillator, so let's just try it. Let's go to our mixer. We're going to take our lock off, make sure our oscillators are all turned up. I'm going to get a nice even balance. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear out modulation here on oscillator 1. It's just going to be our fixed frequency. Here we'll set up mod 2, 100%. Go mod wheel, 100%. Mod wheel, 100%. So we hear oscillators 2, 3, and 4 going up an octave. Oscillator 1 staying stationary. Let's clear those out real quick. And go here. And go back to oscillator 2. And now I'm going to define all these to produce a chord when we bend. So let's play a note. Now let's go to oscillator 3. And I know I want it to be about, let's say, 75 maybe. On that one, and then the fourth oscillator, let's go up a full octave. So there you've created your own custom bend range that allows you to do everything from detuning if you wanted to bend into a full chord. And you could do things like that. So we have stick. We could assign the stick. The only thing to keep in mind is when you're assigning the sticks to control the pitch of the oscillators, keep it within just a couple octaves range. I mean, you got to imagine that this motion is very slight to cover, let's say, 3 or 4 octaves worth of range. And due to the sampling resolution of the potentiometers in these joysticks, it's likely you could get on one of the sample boundaries and hear a little bit of jitter there. But as long as you keep it under, say, 4 octaves, you get a nice smooth range. If we set it up to 10, you'll probably hear more jitter. That's just too high anyway. And primarily, you're going to do that more for like a sound effect if you're recreating like an EMS type synthy patch where you're doing some wild frequency modulations there. Anyway, another thing I'd like to show you about these modulations is, let's say you've got your LFO and your envelope assigned for oscillator 1, and we don't want to use it for pitch modulation, but let's go to one of these waveforms here, dial up a digital waveform, set LFO 1 to be our modulation source, and dial up some other waveform here. So now LFO 1 is doing this modulation here. Now we don't have any control over the LFO 1 here, but what if we did want to? Well, what we can do is go back here to frequency modulation for LFO 1. I'm going to clear this out and show you that even though LFO 1's mod amount for the pitch is 0, we can still assign touch to control the amplitude of that LFO, not to control the frequency of oscillator 1, but now to control the mixing of these waveforms. Now we're doing a fade there. We could do a slice as well. So that's something to keep in mind. Same thing applies when you are using the envelope. For instance, let's clear this out. And let's say touch controls the envelope. Let's go to the envelope. And repeat is on. Let's go to our waveform. Select envelope to control that. And there we can see our envelope's amplitude being controlled by the touch in the oscilloscope display there. So keep that in mind. You do all your controls for the amplitude right here, even if it is controlling it somewhere else. Now let's show you something that is unique about oscillators 2, 3, and 4. So if we go here down to the auxiliary, and in fact we can just click that knob and it's going to show us link 1. Let's go ahead and turn up our modulation amount for auxiliaries 2, 3, and 4 to 100%. And now let's go back to oscillator 1. So when it says link 1, what that means is it's going to use all the modulation amounts dialed in for oscillator 1 to modulate oscillators 2, 3, and 4, whatever is set to link 1. Let's go ahead and increase this LFO. Maybe we want to increase the speed a little bit. Go back here, let's set the control to touch. Now it's hard for us to tell, but that's actually all 4 oscillators playing and being modulated by the same LFO in the same phase. If we go here to our oscillators and just slightly detune them, we'll bring it out that a little bit more. So in that case, let's go back here. The thing we want to watch is just making sure our FM octave ranges are set up the same for each one of these oscillators. If you don't, each oscillator will only modulate by that certain amount. Let's try instead, let's turn this touch off, and instead let's do more of an FM type effect. I'm going to turn the frequency follow for this LFO on. Then, let's say I go back here and turn down this modulation amount. Now we have absolutely no modulation on all the oscillators. Now why that sounds different is because we adjusted FM octave range on oscillator 1 to 4, while 2, 3, and 4 are set to 1. So let's make them all matched here. There we go. Now let's play with this LFO rate for LFO 1. And instead of turning this knob, maybe I want to use the joystick, so I'm going to turn this on. Set it to stick, let's say Y. Select a different wave. Main thing is this link 1 can be very useful for setting up only modulation parameters within frequency mod page 1 and then applying those to oscillators 2, 3, and 4. The other thing to keep in mind here is, let's say you are using LFO 1, envelope 1, and maybe a auxiliary mod to modulate oscillator 1. You wouldn't even have to be listening to oscillator 1. For instance, we could turn it off, but it's still happening, and all those modulations are applying to oscillator 1. Instead, we could get some really crazy stuff going on here. Let's try this. Let's set our envelope 1 up for a long decay time. So you could actually have an LFO and an envelope from oscillator 1 be applied to oscillator 2, 3, or 4. And then in addition to those LFO and envelopes, you could apply each oscillator's LFO and envelope as well to modulate it. So that's 2 LFOs and 2 envelopes, plus a third modulation source, an auxiliary mod, that could all be affecting one single oscillator for very complex modulation. I think that pretty much sums up the frequency modulation section. I would say my advice to you would be to go ahead and just start out with the initialization patch when you are trying to discover what each one of these features do, and just isolate it, listen to that oscillator while you are applying a modulation to it just to see what it does. Everything is so interactive here. You know, you could be modulating with the LFO and you're going to get a completely different result depending on what waveform you apply here, or if the LFO itself has some modulation, or if the sync is on. That creates more predictable results from your LFO because they're always restarting in the same phase. Lots to play around with, so I would encourage you to and explore everything the Vectra can do.